คิดว่าถ้าฝึกข้างในเนี่ยพี่คงจะเป็นลิงแสมเพราะว่าพี่ไม่อยู่นิ่งเลยพี่คิดตลอดเวลาคิดนู่นคิดนี่เดี๋ยวจำไปเดี๋ยวจะปีนไปต้นไม้นี้ไปต้นไม้นึงแต่ข้างนอกเนี่ยพี่พยายามทำตัวให้เหมือนลาบราดอร์แก่ๆจะได้นิ่งๆไงนิ่งๆแล้วมองสังเกตว่าเป็นยังไงบ้างแต่ตอนนี้พี่รู้สึกว่าพี่เป็นลิงทั้งนอกทั้งข้างนอกทั้งข้างในเลยค่ะวันนี้ยุ่งมากทีนี้ทีนี้เราพูดถึงตัวเราละเราจะนึกถึงว่าเราสั่งรบกวนน้องช่วยแชร์กับคนข้างๆเลยค่ะข้างๆของน้องนะคะว่าน้องช่วยบอกเขาเลยว่าเราเป็นสัตว์อะไรนะ
ดีอะไรได้ไปเห็นมีประโยชน์มีไปช่วยพวกได้ประโยชน์โดยเฉพาะให้ประเทศไม่ได้ต้องไหวจริงๆเป็นปัญหาไม่บอกคุณนะเดี๋ยวเขาจะให้ไหนชอบเขาหน่อยบอกว่าวันไหนคนเราลงพบเนี่ยก่อนที่ไปที่เรารู้จักหลวงปู่เนี่ยที่สุรินทร์เอาว่าเขาจะหาได้
เมื่อกี้ได้ยินว่ามีคนอยากเป็นจิ้งจอกเก้าหางนะคะ
จะเอาภาพแบบไหนจะเอาแบบไหน
จิ้งจอกเก้าหางทีนี้เสร็จแล้วใช่ไหมคะ
อยากได้แบบไหนคือเอาเป็นโครงกับพิคเนตได้เป็นไรเนี่ยโครง
เสร็จแล้วหลังจากเราแชร์กับคนใกล้ตัวแล้วรบกวนเปลี่ยนที่ค่ะเปลี่ยนที่ไม่นั่งกับคนเดิมไม่นั่งกับคนหน่วยงานเดียวกันค่ะรบกวนเปลี่ยนที่ภายใน30 วินาทีค่ะไม่งั้นเราจะมีคนมาออกมาเต้นนะคะเกิดเราจะเริ่มนับ10 9 8 7 6 5 4 3ไม่จะลงบริษัทเฮ้ยเดี๋ยวก่อนบอกว่าไม่ใช่จากหน่วยงานเดียวกันแล้วไม่รู้จักกันทำไมไพศิลป์กับบุรษัทยังนั่งอยู่ด้วยกันรบกวนแชร์กันเหมือนเมื่อกี้ค่ะว่าบอกเพื่อนนิดนึงว่าเราเป็นสัตว์อะไรนะคะ โอเคค่ะหลังจากเสร็จแล้วมีใครอยากจะแชร์ไหมคะแต่พี่อยากให้น้องบางคนแชร์พี่ยงอยากรู้ว่าทำไมเขาถึงอยากเป็นตัวนี้นะคะ ใครนะคะที่อยากเป็นจิ้งจก9 หางขอมาแชร์หน่อยค่ะว่าทำไมถึงอยากเป็นจิ้งจก9 หางเป็นจิ้งจก9 หางอยากให้มีคนเดินจิ้งจกงงมาก
หนูพูดมันเหมือนพูดเล่นมากกว่านะคะไม่ได้จริงจังแต่ว่าในลักษณะไอ้พวกจิ้งจอก9 หางนี่มันเหมือนกับเป็นสัตว์ในตำนานจีนพวกอะไรอย่างเงี้ยมันจะแบบเจ้าเร่ห์แต่ว่ามีความสวยอยู่ในตัวอะไรอย่างเงี้ยนะคะแต่นี่หนูพูดเล่น
พี่บอกว่ารับไม่ได้มีใครอยากพูดของตัวเองไหมคะแต่พี่สนใจคนหนึ่งเขาบอกว่าเขาอยากเป็นภาระค่ะเขาอยากเป็นภาระมันเป็นตัวแบบไหน
ผมพูดเล่นครับ
ยังไม่จบเลยภาระอยากรู้ภาระเป็นตัวยังไง
อย่างที่เห็นเลย
ที่เห็นเลยใช่ไหมคะน้องดาวอยากเป็นเสือลายเมฆอันดับแรกเสี่ยงต่อการสูญพันธุ์อันดับที่2อย่าเพิ่งคอมเมนต์ค่ะอันดับที่2เป็นเสือที่รักเดียวใจเดียวค่ะรักเดียวใจเดียวแล้วก็ลักษณะนิสัยเนี่ยจะเป็นสัตว์ที่ขี้อายชอบหลบซ่อนแต่ว่าถ้าเกิดระยะประชิดตัวเมื่อไหร่เราก็จะสู้ค่ะแล้วข้อสุดท้ายเนี่ยเสือลายเมฆที่คู่ที่เหมาะสมที่สุดคือตัวผู้ต้องอายุน้อยกว่าตัวเมียค่ะเดี๋ยวดิฉันต้องถามคำถามที่ข้อเจอแล้วหรือยังคะยังโอ้ไม่น่าถึงใกล้สูญพันธุ์อะไรนะให้รีบจองนะคะใครที่อยู่ตรงนี้นะคะให้รีบจองมีใครอีกไหมคะน้องแก้วโอ้ยอยากมีเป็นปลาวาฬใครอยากเป็นปลาวาฬคะตัวเล็กมากน้องที่ทำที่ภูเก็ตทำไมถึงอยากเป็นปลาวาฬคะ
อยากเป็นปลาวาฬปลาวาฬเพราะว่าตัวใหญ่ใจดีค่ะแล้วก็ใกล้จะสูญพันธุ์แต่ว่าก็จะชอบร่ายรำมีศิลปะเป็นอาร์ตตัวแม่เป็นตัวเองค่ะแล้วก็ตอนนี้ก็หายากต้องการมีแต่คนศึกษาคนฟ้าปลาวาฬเยอะนะคะก็เลยเหมือนตัวเองที่มีแต่คนต้องจะศึกษาคนฟ้าตัวเรา
ให้ความสำคัญคนให้ความสำคัญนะคะ
คนให้ความสำคัญ
ค่ะขอบคุณมากค่ะอันนี้เดี๋ยวไว้ถ้าเผื่อใครอยากจะรู้ว่าใครอยากจะบอกถึงว่าตัวเองเป็นสัตว์อะไรนะคะก็เดี๋ยวไปคุยกันช่วงเบรกเดี๋ยวตอนนี้เดี๋ยวเราต้องเริ่มก่อนเพราะเดี๋ยวจะไม่มีเวลาทีนี้ก่อนที่เราจะเริ่มค่ะเมื่อกี้คุณคริสกับคุณดอมมาถามพี่บอกว่าเนี่ยพวกเราเป็นใครมาจากไหนกันบ้างเขาไม่รู้จักเลยขอให้ช่วยแนะนำตัวหน่อยได้ไหมเพราะฉะนั้นรบกวนขอน้องช่วยแนะนำตัวหน่อยได้ไหมคะเพราะว่าคุณคริสกับคุณดอมได้ทำความรู้จักเพราะเรารู้จักเขากันไปแล้วนะคะเริ่มจากน้องพัชราพรก่อนเลยค่ะ
ชื่อปวานสวัสดีค่ะชื่อพัชราพรแก้วโมงค่ะชื่อเล่นชื่อฟ้านะคะทำงานอยู่ที่สถาบันวิจัยและพัฒนาทรัพยากรทางทะเลชายฝั่งทะเลและปลาทะเลจังหวัดภูเก็ตค่ะ
Good morning, everybody. My name is Narisala Buntan. Come from Chiang Mai Province, Thailand. Now I work at Zoological Park Organization, Thailand. ค่ะสวัสดีค่ะชื่อนันทิตารักษาชาตินะคะทำงานที่สำนักอนุรักษ์พื้นที่อนุรักษ์ที่11เพิ่งเปลี่ยนที่ทำงานใหม่จึงจำชื่อไม่ได้ของกรมอุทยานค่ะ
สวัสดีค่ะ ชื่อสัตวแพทย์หญิงสุภการแก้วโชติค่ะ ก็ DNP Wildlife West นะคะสำนักอนุรักษ์พื้นที่ที่ 2 ศรีราชาค่ะ
สวัสดีครับ ชื่อนายสัตวแพทย์บุรชาติตันประดิษฐ์นะครับ ชื่อเล่นไวกิ้งครับทำงานอยู่ที่ส่วนกลางกรุงเทพครับกรมอุทยานแห่งชาติครับ
Good morning, my name is Paisit Lecturer and I'm working at the Protected Area General Office 9 at Ubon Ratchathani. I'm come from DNP too.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Panik Kesatikun. I'm from Zoological Organization. And I'm also work at Culture Open School.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Daraka Thongthainan, or you can call me Dao. I am the veterinarian at Khao Kiao Open Zoo. สัตวแพทย์หญิงกนกวรรณ จารุยานนท์นะคะ จากสำนักบริหารพื้นที่อนุรักษ์ที่ 4 ค่ะ สุราษฎร์ธานีค่ะ BNP ค่ะ
Good morning, everyone. I'm Ankana Somanatwish. I am a zoo pathologist from Zoological Park Organization.
สวัสดีครับ ชื่อชวพันธ์เดียริมงคลครับทำงานที่มหิดลที่นี่ครับเป็นผู้ช่วยสอนแล้วก็เป็นคลินิเชียนของหน่วย Exotic Pet ครับ
สวัสดีค่ะ ชื่อสัตวแพทย์หญิงสุภลักษณ์ประจันค่ะทำงานที่สำนักบริหารพื้นที่อนุรักษ์ที่ 7 นครราชสีมาค่ะ
My name is Benjamin Sankarak. Call me Say. I work in DNP Wildlife.
Good morning. My name is Mano Yindi from Maiton University.
ครับ My name วันเสน่ห์ครับ from DNP ขอนแก่น Province
สวัสดีค่ะกิติยาพร เอี่ยมสะอาดนะคะ มาจากสถานีปิดแล้วค่ะมาจากส่วนกลางค่ะ DNP ที่กรุงเทพค่ะ
อ๋อ ติดโทรศัพท์อยู่ค่ะ อ๋อ เชิญค่ะ
ครับพัทรพลไม่หยอดครับ จากกรมอุทยานครับ อยู่สำนักบริหารพื้นที่อนุรักษ์ที่ 1 ปราจีนบุรีครับ
ปราจีนบุรีใช่ไหมคะ
ครับ อยากเป็นงูครับ
อยากเป็นครู
งูครับงู
งูทำไมถึงอยากเป็นงูล่ะคะ
ก็ผมกลัวงูครับ
เอ้า เป็นกลัวงูแล้วทำไมอยากเป็นงูล่ะคะ
เราก็ต้องเป็นในสิ่งที่เรากลัวเราจะสามารถอยู่กับมันได้ครับ
เราได้เอาชนะความกลัวในใจของเราได้นะคะงู
แต่จะมีใคร
เป็นปรัชญา
มีใครท้า
ท้าแล้วสู้เลยใช่ไหมคะ
ไม่ครับแล้วแต่ครับ
แต่น่ากลัวกว่า ทีนี้ก่อนที่เราจะเริ่มขอมาที่ agenda นิดนึงนะคะ agenda ที่ตามตารางค่ะพอดีเดี๋ยวจะให้เจ้าหน้าที่ติดตั้ง presentation อยู่นะคะทีนี้มาดูagenda ของเรานิดนึงนะคะพอดีวันนี้เราเริ่มเลทเนาะตอนนี้เราอยู่ช่วง workshop introduction เดี๋ยวจะ move ไป introduction to EPI ในอีกไม่เกิน2 นาทีนะคะ ทีนี้ถ้าเกิดน้องดูตามตารางนะคะ ก็จะตามตารางนั้นยกเว้นตอนที่ 10:45 ถึง 11:45 นะคะ low and responsibility เนี่ยเราจะย้ายไปก่อนนะคะ ยังไม่รู้จะย้ายไปไหนแต่ว่าย้ายไปก่อนนะคะ นอกนั้นก็จะทำตามตารางนะคะ ทีนี้ถ้าเกิดน้องมาดูที่วันที่2นะคะช่วง 8:30 ถึง 10:30 นะคะ อันสุดท้ายช่องสุดท้าย Design of Data Collection Construction and Worksheet เราจะย้ายไปช่วง 6:00 ถึง 3:00 ของวันที่2เหมือนกันนะคะน้องนั้นก็ ก็จะตามตารางที่วางไว้นะคะ ถ้าเผื่อมีอะไรที่เพิ่มเติมแล้วเดี๋ยวจะแจ้งให้ทราบนะคะ ทีนี้ท่านอาจารย์ปานเทพได้เดินทางมาถึงแล้วนะคะ จะขอให้ท่านอาจารย์ปานเทพช่วยทำพิธีเปิดเลยนะคะ
ขอบคุณครับไม่ใช่เพิ่งเดินทางมาถึงครับเดินทางมาแต่ถึง6:30แล้ว พอดีวันนี้มีงาน2 งานนะครับพอดีท่านอธิการมาทำ performance agreement กับคณะนะครับแต่ท่านก็ต้องไปรับแล้วก็เพิ่งเสร็จมาเมื่อกี้นะครับก็อันนี้ก็ขอต้อนรับทุกคนอีกครั้งหนึ่งนะครับผมไม่ต้องแนะนำตัวว่าใครเป็นใครเพราะรู้จักกันแล้วนะครับแล้วก็มีเพิ่มเติมเข้ามาจากกรมอุทยานอีกนะครับก็ไม่ใช่กรมอุทยานจากองค์การสวนสัตว์นะครับก็ยินดีต้อนรับนะครับส่วนก็มี Hello Dominic Hello Chris Antes See you again แล้วก็มีวิทยากรเพิ่มเติมมาจากต่างประเทศแบรนด์โอเค so พูดไทยอย่างเดียวแล้วกันนะครับฝรั่งอยากฟังก็ใส่หูเพิ่งวิ่งมาจากล่างนะครับเอาละครับวันนี้ก็ดีใจนะครับที่ทุกคนได้รับการบรรจุไปเรียบร้อยแล้วนะครับก็บางคนไม่ใจหายใจคว่ำก็จะไม่ได้มาก็ไม่เป็นไรก็ได้โทรเรียนท่านทิพดีนะครับก็ท่านกับเซ็นให้ปุ๊บมาแล้วก็เดี๋ยววันสุดท้ายนะครับน่าจะเป็นท่านรองมาทำพิธีปิดให้สำหรับนะครับสำหรับความสำคัญของคอร์สนี้เนี่ยนะครับก็เป็นโมดูลที่3ซึ่งเราคิดว่าพวกเรายังจำเป็นจะต้องรู้ในเรื่องที่ลึกเข้ามาเรื่อยๆคือเรื่องของไวรัสเวทเนเรียนในแง่ของไวรัส epidemiology นะครับซึ่งเป็นเรื่องที่สำคัญมากและเป็นความมุ่งหมายที่ต้องการให้พวกเรามีความรู้ความเข้าใจตรงนี้เพราะเราจะเป็นฟรอนต์ไลน์ของ zoonotic infectious disease ในอนาคตนะครับเพราะฉะนั้นทุกท่านก็จะต้องเตรียมตัวเตรียมใจให้พร้อมตรงนี้เราคงไม่เอาเป็นเอาตายในเรื่องจะต้องมานั่งวิเคราะห์สถิตินะครับเพราะกลัวจะตายซะก่อนนะครับแต่เอาที่เดิมเป็นรูปแบบนะครับหลายๆท่านเห็นแล้วอาจจะแย่งัดตั้งแต่สมัยเรียนบอกว่าโอ้โหเจอเรื่องที่เดิมนี่ก็มึนแล้วนะครับแต่ว่าคราวนี้เราต้องการให้เราเข้าใจในเรื่องของเราจะเห็นความแตกต่างระหว่างที่เดิมในเรื่องของสัตว์เลี้ยงปศุสัตว์กับสัตว์ป่ายังไงหน้าที่ของเราคืออะไรเวลาที่ต้องทำสิ่งแบบนั้นนะครับแล้วเราจะประสบผลสำเร็จได้ยังไงถ้าเราต้องรับหน้าที่เป็นวายเรนนะครับและทำหน้าที่ในพื้นที่นะครับสิ่งที่อยากจะได้จากนี้ต่อไปก็คือสุดท้ายเราก็จะมีแนวทางความรู้แนวคิดในงานที่จะเฝ้าระวังโรคจากสัตว์ป่าและโรคติดต่อแม้แต่เป็นโรคของสัตว์ไปที่มีเมื่อขึ้นมานะครับเราก็หวังว่าเราจะได้มีเป็นสิ่งที่เป็นแฮนด์บุ๊กสำหรับพวกเราทุกคนในการทำงานหลายๆอันเราใช้ของ OAE มาเป็นต้นแบบให้ดูนะครับแต่ทุกอย่างมันไม่ได้ติดกับในประเทศเราทั้งหมดนะครับเพราะฉะนั้นสิ่งที่เราจะเรียนจากวิทยากรนั้นก็จะมีตั้งแต่เรื่องต้นบางอย่างนะครับแล้วก็ไปจนถึงสิ่งที่เป็นเรื่องหรือว่าประสบการณ์จริงแต่จะเกิดในแอฟริกาหรือที่อื่นนะครับส่วนของเราจะนำ H5N1 มาเป็นเคสที่เป็นหลักนะครับในการศึกษาว่าการที่เดิมเพราะฉะนั้นก็หวังว่าพวกเราจะได้สนุกสนานนะครับกับคอร์สนี้อย่างเคยนะครับอาจจะมีเรื่องที่ต้องเรียนรู้แล้วก็ตั้งใจมากหนักขึ้นกว่าเดิมนะครับวันนี้ออกแรงสมองมากขึ้นนะครับออกแรงกายน้อยหน่อยนะฮะฉะนั้นก็ขอจะต้องตั้งใจแล้วก็ได้มากันครบถ้วนทุกวันนะครับก็ขอให้ทุกท่านประสบความสำเร็จในการร่วมเวิร์กช็อปครั้งนี้นะครับขอขอบคุณทุกท่านครับขอบคุณวิทยากรทุกท่านด้วยครับขอบคุณครับ
ขอบคุณค่ะท่านอาจารย์ปานเทพนะคะทีนี้เมื่อต้นเดือนนี้มีเหตุการณ์ที่เกิดขึ้นของสัตวแพทย์นะคะเพิ่งทราบว่าปีนี้มีการกำหนด วันสัตวแพทย์ไทยด้วยช่วงต้นสิงหาคมเนี่ยมีการกำหนดปีนี้เป็นปีแรกวันสัตวแพทย์ไทยใครทราบบ้างว่าวันสัตวแพทย์ไทยวันอะไรคะวันที่เท่าไหร่ไม่มีใครทราบเลยเหรอ4 สิงหาทำไมถึงกำหนดปีนี้เป็นปีแรกคะทราบไหมคะไม่ทราบปีนี้เป็นปีที่99ของคณะสัตวแพทย์ไทยในเมืองไทยนะคะเป็นปีที่จาก99แล้วก็จะก้าวไปที่100ที่เขาเลือกวันที่4เนี่ยเพราะว่าวันที่4เนี่ยเป็นวันที่สิงหาเมื่อ63 ปีที่แล้วเนี่ยเป็นวันที่ในหลวงรับสมาคมสัตวแพทย์เป็นราชาอุปถัมภ์นะคะนี่เดี๋ยวคุณคิดคงใกล้จะพร้อมแล้วนะคะ เดี๋ยวพี่จะโอนเวทีมาให้คุณคิดเลยนะคะคุณคิดจะได้พูดถึงเรื่องเกี่ยวกับอินโทรเรื่องเกี่ยวกับอินโทรเอฟซีนะคะเราพูด
Does everyone have on their headsets that need them, or yes? Everybody understands me? So I have a couple of questions before I get started. First, those of you that are the DNP vets, can you raise your hand? Okay. I want you all to know, I understand that you had a difficult morning with your transition today, and I think I know to a very small amount how you're feeling, because I came yesterday. It took me 2 days to come from Africa, and my luggage was lost, so I only have one thing of clothes and don't have my suitcase, so I know how you feel a little bit to be in a new place this morning. And I also haven't slept very well, so I think many of you feel the same way. I have one other question. Is when I'm very happily surprised, I think, to see basically half women and half men, and I'm wondering when you're in vet school here, what is the ratio of men to women? Can anybody tell me?
70 to 30.
70%
of female.
70% female. So that's about the same as the U.S. right now. Very, very similar, and I think it's hopefully it's encouraging, because I think we need. I think the women bring a lot more compassion to the profession that I think has been missing for a long time. So I'm happy to see that it's the same here.
His wife is a veterinarian, and he knows I will go tell her that she's being made
I think some of you have met my wife. I think Felicia, who was here for previous training. Yes, yeah. So she's my wife. She's a tall one. And maybe you don't know, but if you care, the reason that she's not here and that I'm kind of filling in is because we just had a baby. So I should, if I was, I'll find a picture to show tomorrow if anybody wants to share our little bit of joy. So. Okay, so I have my headset on, so I'm going to rely on you, Dominic, if there's any. Oh, actually, if there's any problem with the translation, you just need to signal me. if I go too fast. Are we going to try to stay on schedule? So 30 minutes now?
Take the time you need.
35?
Take the time you need.
Okay. So the instructions are on the side. Hopefully I can... Yeah, having a little trouble reading this. What we wanted to do today to basically do a very kind of broad introduction. And so I wanted to share with you a little bit of my experience about being a wildlife vet. And I think since many of you come from experiences with zoos, trying to tie together the experiences from zoos as well as from wildlife and how that fits into the big picture of what we're trying to cover this week with epidemiology. I think many times we think about zoo medicine and wildlife medicine as being very different, except for the animals. And I deliberately chose this group of pictures to start off with because this is actually a mix of both zoo medicine and wildlife medicine, at least in terms of clinical cases. So I just wanted to remind you that those of you that have experiences with zoos, that things are not entirely different. I think when we think about zoo medicine and wildlife medicine, we very often think that the differences are between where it takes place. So with zoo medicine, we may be working with the same animals in zoos, but in wildlife medicine, we are working with those animals in the wild. And that, to some extent, that's part of what's true. But one of the other things that I want to point out is that one of the other sort of broad differences between zoo medicine, some of the broad differences between zoological medicine and wildlife medicine is really the level of treatment that we work with mostly. As many of you know, in zoo medicine we're primarily focused on individual animals and individual cases and treating those cases. And in wildlife medicine we're mostly worried about populations and looking at large whole groups of animals and or how they interact with the environment. But both of these things do overlap and do cover into the sort of other end of the spectrum. So sometimes in zoo medicine we are worried about the whole population of animals that might be in a zoo and how diseases might spread from some animals in a zoo into other animals. And sometimes with wildlife medicine we're also doing individual treatment. So a lot of the things that I'm going to talk about today are going to be based from my experiences with wildlife medicine that cover this whole range from dealing with individual cases to looking at things on a population level. I think, have you guys seen this slide before from Respond presentations? No? Okay. This is actually the slide that's prepared from the USAID office in Washington that tries to help explain to a general audience the purpose of all the EPT, or Emerging Pandemic Threats Program. And if you look at this slide, most of you familiar with what the curve means. So the curve is what we would call an epidemic curve or an outbreak curve. And the idea is that over the course of time, you have more and more cases that eventually you reach a peak and then those numbers start to drop off. So this is the standard epidemic curve. So this is one of the fundamental things in epidemiology that we'll be talking about for the rest of the week. Sort of stems around this curve. Part of the idea with the Emerging Pandemic Threats Program is, as you can see on the curve, this curve, when you have the first case down there on the left. I think you can all see it, but we have the first case. And very often, you have a first case, and then more and more animals or people start to get sick, and then you might finally have detection when the disease is figured out. Well, when you first detect that people or animals have started to get sick, and then at some point later on, you may have a confirmation of whatever the disease or illness is, and then usually the response comes in fairly late, and sometimes after the epidemic has peaked. What we're trying to do with this whole program is basically make that curve smaller so that less people ultimately, or in some cases less animals, are getting sick. So we're basically just trying to shift this whole curve forward so that the detection and the confirmation and the response come much quicker, so that fewer people or animals, but this is mostly the EPT is really focused on the public health end of it, and when people start to get sick. And without getting too complicated, and again, I just wanted to present these because this is, when we look at the foundation of the EPT program, it really is about these sort of fundamental concepts of epidemiology. So this is the same thing with multiple epidemic curves overlaid from different groups. So the green lines, if you think of this is just the background cycles of disease that may be happening in wildlife. So we have, the wildlife that the program is mostly concerned with, rodents, bats, and primates. And you have these normal cycles of disease with, many animals getting sick, they recover, they get sick again. Part of what we're worried about is that when those diseases spill over from these animal populations, these wild animal populations, either into the domestic livestock, where you can have sort of amplification in these animals and a much larger amount of contact with humans, or a direct spillover into the human population. So again, the idea here is that if we can, with any of these curves, if we can be detecting and understanding them quicker, then we can make these outbreaks less severe. Have you all seen these sort of things before? Is this kind of familiar, or is this new? You can go ahead and speak up. Yes? No? Some of you have seen this before. Some of you have not. Yes? Okay. So most of my experience with wildlife is about mountain gorillas. And so I'm going to talk about my experience with mountain gorillas and how some of this ties together with wildlife medicine and epidemiology. And obviously I know that you don't have mountain gorillas here in Thailand, but you do have apes and many other primates. And I think if you can just imagine that whichever animals you're most familiar with working with, that a lot of these issues will be the same as what I hope to present with the mountain gorillas. I hope you've all seen something like this before. Yes? Okay. So I think the mountain gorilla situation is quite a good example, or it's quite a classic situation where you have this sort of issue of One Health, that you have issues of human health and public health, the environmental health issues, and veterinary medicine. In the middle is where we have this sort of One Health. This is how I tend to think about One Health. I think many others think of it more as a circle that sort of encompasses everything. But I sort of think of it as the intersection between these three different areas. Can you all read English? Yes? Okay. So I'll read this anyway, since some of you are sitting in the back. But this is I found this a very interesting thing because many of us think of One Health as being a very new concept and something that is very new and different from the past. But I think this quote actually shows that this is very, historically, the relationship between human and veterinary medicine has long been recognized. And I think this is a very nice summary of at least those two parts of the One Health, without looking at the environmental health issue of it. But the important message here is that the whole One Health approach really isn't anything new. I think it's just that in the past 50 years, we've all become very specialized in human medicine and in veterinary medicine, and now we're sort of coming back full circle to realize that, for the most, truly, humans are just another animal. So the issues that affect human medicine are very similar to all the ones that affect animals in veterinary medicine. Yeah, so the quote there, I forgot if that was laid up before, but this is from 1873, is when Dr. Virchow wrote this quote. So mountain gorillas, part of the issue with the mountain gorillas is that they are isolated in a very small area. And I use this slide to show that you can see the gorilla in the foreground in the national park, but in the background it's all very cultivated. And just to emphasize that the mountain gorillas are very, even though they live in a fairly pristine or natural ecosystem, they're very much influenced by human and environmental factors. And their habitat is almost completely enclosed by very thick, densely settled human population. And because of that, it does have an effect on the health of the gorillas, which hopefully I can convince you of for the rest of the talk. This is to highlight some of those issues and the relationship just between both the health of the gorillas and the life of the gorillas. So there is, in these areas, there's some habitat destruction, so there is pressure for people to cut down the forest and to get firewood, as well as to collect bamboo and water and those sort of things. So there's a lot of human pressure to use that environment, and I think that's also very true in most of Southeast Asia. There is also poaching. This is does anybody know what that is? Somebody must know. Yes? Yes, it's an elephant still. It's African elephant. It's slightly different from your Asian elephants, but so there is poaching, both to capture live animals for the pet trade as well as for eating animals, so bushmeat. And I think my understanding is that usually we don't refer to bushmeat in Asia. Is that true? But does everybody know what I mean by bushmeat? So in Africa, when people kill wild animals to eat them directly, in Africa it's referred to as bushmeat. And I think that the tradition and the culture is a bit different here in Asia, and I think it's generally not something that sort of spills over directly from consumption of livestock. So I think it's sort of slightly different culture, but it's the same issue of killing wild animals that may be protected or not protected for meat. So that is a pressure that also happens with gorillas. This is an example of a live baby gorilla that has been caught by poachers, so that's also part of this poaching pressure. And this is a picture, hopefully you can tell here, this is quite a sick baby gorilla that has an upper respiratory disease, probably from contact with people. I want to point out too that I'm mostly going to be talking about gorillas, but there are other animals in the environment, and this is one of the most difficult parts of wildlife medicine. Is in some cases we may know a lot about the diseases and the ecology and the epidemiology of one species in an environment, but very often we don't have a good picture of how those diseases might be circulating with other species. So I think this is one of the big challenges for us as wildlife veterinarians and epidemiologists, and one of the things that the EPC programs are trying to better understand is how the infectious diseases relate among all these different animals. And even with the mountain gorillas that are so well studied, we don't have very much information about the diseases in any of these other species, although we're slowly starting to accumulate it. Here's a chameleon for my friend that I was telling that I wanted to be a chameleon. So, and I think one of the issues that we will talk about quite a bit this weekend is a very important one for the One Health approach, is this interface between wild animals and livestock. So these are all pictures of the gorillas either coming outside of the park or having very close contact with domestic animals. So you can see, actually these are gorillas that are climbing over a wall. So this wall has been constructed around the national park to try to mark where the border is so that people don't continue to try to cut down and do farming. And it also is partly there to keep the wild buffalo inside the park, because the buffalo can't jump over this wall. So but the problem is that obviously the gorillas can just climb right over the wall, so they can come and go out of the park if they want to. So sometimes they come out into these fields, and these are fields that haven't been planted in a while, but they have weeds that have grown, and the gorillas like to eat these. So the gorillas will come out and oftentimes be in very close proximity with domestic animals. So these are goats here, and you can't see them very well, but those are cows back there. And this is this is a very important issue with these wild animals. And even though we think of gorillas and cows are very distantly related, zoologically, there's still a lot of opportunity for mixing of diseases here. The cows may be pooping in the fields. Their fertilizer might be used for some of the agriculture. The gorillas are coming out and they're eating different things. So it's very easy to imagine that any of the infectious diseases that might be present in these the livestock can be easily transmitted to the gorillas. And likewise, when the gorillas are going out, they can be spreading diseases that they might have into the livestock. And obviously, one of the bigger issues is the potential transmission between the gorillas and people. Because gorillas are very closely related to people, then, at least in theory, there are many more diseases that will be shared and will be easily transmissible between humans and people. And I'll talk about this a little bit more, but this is one of the unique situations that we have with these gorillas is, obviously, as you can tell from these pictures, they're very used to being visited by people. So even though these are totally wild gorillas that live out in the jungle and the forest, because for many, many years they've been being visited by people, they accept and they're comfortable with people getting close. And in fact, this here is obviously much too close. And in fact, the rules when you're visiting the gorillas is that you're supposed to stay 7 meters away. And part of the reason for that is because that there's good evidence that that's a reasonable window to be able to be transmitting viruses and bacteria from coughing and sneezing and those sort of things. So some of those rules are there to try to protect the gorillas from human diseases. But obviously the gorillas can kind of go where they want to, and oftentimes it's the gorillas that break those rules because they don't know any better. But it's a very, very important issue because of the obvious risk of transmission of disease between the people and gorillas. And so both the previous pictures were the local people, the Africans that work with the gorillas, but there are also many, many tourists that come to visit these gorillas. And that's another whole epidemiologic issue, because you can imagine that maybe if the gorillas have been with all the same local people, then they may be sharing diseases and they may have some immunity to things that they've been exposed to from the people. But when you have foreign tourists that are coming in from all over the world, and they're coming on airplanes and they're mixing up with other people, it's very easy to imagine that they could be bringing in very, very foreign diseases that the gorillas may have never been exposed to that could potentially be very dangerous. And likewise, and this is most of the countries where these gorillas live in, it's a very poor part of the world. Most of the local people do not have good access to health care. So there are many, many issues with just the basic, any of the basic diseases and sicknesses that the local people might have, and how those can be being transmitted to the gorillas. One of the rules that are in place for visiting the gorillas is you have to be a certain age. You have to be 15 years old, even as a tourist, to come and visit the gorillas. And that's because, I think as most of you know, that either have children or younger brothers and sisters, because little children are much more likely to be carrying diseases because they're young, they haven't been exposed to everything, they aren't necessarily vaccinated. So in general, young children can be a particular risk both to gorillas and to other wild animals, as well as to other children, just because they're much more likely to be carrying infectious diseases. Just want to just make a couple points about just like animals that you work with in the zoo. It's very important when you're working with wildlife to understand the basic things about their ecology and the way that they live, because that both affects the way diseases might circulate, but it also affects the way that you might have to treat them and different ways that you have to work with them. So I think most of us that are trained as veterinarians, we're sort of used to working with different animals, and we know the difference between the anatomy of a horse and a cow and a goat and a dog and a pig and a chicken as an individual animal. But with wild animals, and one of the things that we usually are not very well trained in as veterinarians is natural history and ecology, because for domestic animals, it generally doesn't matter. People bring them in, they're pets in their house, and those things aren't really a factor. So it's very important as you start to transition from whatever background you have into working with wildlife, to make sure that you have a good understanding of the ecology and the natural history of the animals that you're working with. So for example, mountain gorillas are very social animals. So they live in very tight family groups, and this obviously is important for how diseases might spread. So they may spread very well and very easily within the group, but the groups may not have contact with other groups, so that's going to affect the ecology of how diseases might spread and the epidemiology of if a disease is introduced, it might make one group very sick, but may not spread beyond one group. It's also obviously important to know the differences between the different sexes of gorillas. So for those of you that don't know, male gorillas are much different from female gorillas when they're adults. So as you can see here, a male gorilla is almost twice as big as a female. And so that makes it easier sometimes to be able to distinguish between different types of them. And this is also something that may be important when you start to deal with wildlife, is to be able to, when you don't have animals that are known, to be able to distinguish between individuals. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a second. Gorillas also have very strong social bonds. So baby gorillas usually stay very, very close with their mothers for their first few years of their life, up until maybe even 3 years. And they're almost always very close or even attached to their mothers. And how that might affect you as a wildlife vet, first, just in the sicknesses and in treatments, usually if a mother gorilla is sick, the baby is also going to be sick, or if a baby is sick, the mother is also going to be sick, because the two of them are basically almost like a single unit. The other thing is that if you ever have to treat an animal like a gorilla that's a young baby, you can't do it without having to manage the mother. So, for example, whenever we have to work on baby gorillas, we usually have to anesthetize both the mother and the baby just to be able to work safely on the baby, because otherwise the mother would never let anyone touch the baby gorilla. So again, this is just something, it's fairly obvious, but these are issues that you may have to start to deal with wild animals that you generally don't have to deal with in the zoos or with captive and pet animals. The other important thing, obviously, is nutrition. And this is an important thing, obviously, for disease ecology and for the management of gorillas, and it's also an important part of the environmental equation about One Health. So if you can be in a bad environment and the food may not be good, and that's going to affect health. There could be vectors and different diseases with different things that they eat. And again, this is something that we generally don't worry very much about. I mean, yes, sort of basic nutrition with pet animals and in zoos, but very different in the wild, and understanding the natural things that gorillas might eat. So gorillas are mostly vegetarian. They sometimes eat insects. So these are some pictures of a gorilla eating ants out of a hole in the ground. And then they sometimes will try to search different minerals. So these are some gorillas that are picking lichen and licking some salt off of these rocks. But gorillas are mostly vegetarian. The other thing, as I mentioned before, which can be important with working with wildlife is in cases where you're able to tell individual gorillas apart. So in some cases, this is very easy. Obviously, we have a very small baby and a very big male gorilla. But in other cases, gorillas might sort of look kind of the same. And does anybody know how we tell different gorillas apart? So if you look at these gorillas very closely, these are the same two from the previous picture, and this is a close-up of their faces. And if you look at their noses, you can see that they have these different wrinkle patterns on their noses. So this is the way that we're able to distinguish gorillas maybe before we get to know them very well, to be able to know individuals. And this is something that can be very important when you're working with wildlife, and to be able to distinguish different individuals, both so that you can track their health, as well as you can figure out if it's the same animal that you're seeing every day. You want to know if a disease is spreading. So there are different methods for doing this with different animals. And different tricks, based on, hair color, and with elephants, the shape of their ears and different things like that. But this is something that, again, we're usually not very well trained in as veterinarians, but wildlife biologists, it's very common for them, and these are tricks that we need to both be aware of and to learn in order to be effective wildlife veterinarians. Just want to talk some of the issues with the mountain gorillas. There are a lot of cases where the hunters will set traps in the forest to try to catch other animals. So this is called a bushbuck, and the hunters will set a snare trap to try to catch bushbuck and then come in and to take them out to eat them. So this is a typical bushmeat animal from Africa. The problem is the hunters will make many of these traps. So this is just a pile of these snares that the teams have gone out in the forest trying to look for these traps to remove them so that animals don't get caught. And this is only a couple months worth of checking, and they can find this many traps. And the reason that these are important with the gorillas is because the gorillas will sometimes by accident get caught in them. So these are both feet. Yeah. These are both hind feet of gorillas that have been caught in snares. So one of the things that we often have to do as wildlife veterinarians with the gorillas is to anesthetize them in order to remove snares. And I think this is a problem everywhere in the world where there's regular subsistence hunting and hunters that are going in and setting these kind of traps in the forest. Because even animals kind of as smart as gorillas that can be aware of their environment can get caught in these sort of traps. Obviously not an infectious disease or an issue, but something that we have to work with as veterinarians. So obviously this is a gorilla hand in a snare. So just want to talk a little bit about the Mountain Gorilla Veterinary Project. So this is the organization that I work for. We had a number of veterinarians, both expatriate veterinarians and African veterinarians. We worked very closely with the National Parks Authority. So we were a small non-governmental organization, but we worked in partnership with the National Parks because the National Parks, when we first started, they did not have any of their own veterinarians. And I think who was it? I think Dan mentioned earlier how special and unique it is here in Thailand to have all of you that have been hired by the National Parks. And I think there are many challenges, but I think it's a very special and unique case. And I think Dan reinforced that it's very unique in this region, but I think it's actually fairly unique in the whole world, except for maybe some countries in Europe and the U.S. that have regular national park veterinarians, but to have a large number of you that have all been hired to do this work, I think it's very important, and to me, it says a lot about the government here in Thailand and how much value there is on wildlife. So I think it's very impressive, and I think there's a very good opportunity for all of you to make a very big difference in this country. Oh, sorry. I meant to just point out, so we were working with the National Parks. This is actually one woman who was trained as a veterinary technician who did work for the National Parks, but that was sort of the highest level of veterinary specialty that they had within the National Parks Corps. And we also had our own gentleman that worked in the laboratory to help us. So some of the basic activities that we did in the project, we did a lot of just the regular monitoring of the gorillas, and we're going to talk a lot more about that this week, and collecting epidemiologic data and just regular observational data. We collected a lot of biological samples, and again, we'll talk a lot more about this and how this fits in with the overall patterns and importance of epidemiology. We were also involved with a human medical program to try to make sure that the people that were working with gorillas were healthy and they did not have diseases that might be of risk to gorillas. And again, this is part of the sort of One Health approach that we've been taking with the mountain gorillas. We also did a fair amount of science and research trying to better understand the health issues with the gorillas as well as other animals. We did some research with cows and goats outside of the park and starting to do some work with domestic dogs. And lastly, very rarely did we actually get to be veterinarians. And I think this is one thing that you might all be thinking more about, or you may even already be understanding in your jobs working for the national parks, is that when you're really a wildlife veterinarian, most of the time you're not actually being a veterinarian. You're doing all the other things that I've talked about, in the data collection and monitoring, and much less writing reports and going to meetings and going to trainings. But depending on your roles in the work, there may actually be not lots of opportunities that you get to feel like you're being a veterinarian and actually physically working on animals. So for the data collection, there's mostly two different kinds, and I think we'll talk a little bit more about this week, but we refer to non-invasive sample collection and invasive. So, for example, most of my PhD work was collecting fecal samples, poop samples from the gorillas after they poop in the forest. And what's nice about gorillas is that they build nests at night where they sleep, and usually when they get up in the morning, they'll all poop in their nest and then leave. So you just have to go and find where the gorilla nests are in the morning, and you can collect a sample from each one of the gorillas. And then you can use that for genetic analysis and other infectious diseases and all kinds of different things. So it's actually a very nice thing about gorillas, and something that, as wildlife veterinarians, you have to take advantage of those samples that you can get, because it's not always easy or possible or feasible to be anesthetizing animals and drawing blood samples and doing all of the things that we're more used to doing. So again, that's a picture of the gorilla poop in a nest. I won't talk too much about the instrument, but another important part of this sort of work is also doing collecting samples from gorillas that have died. And I think you probably all have a fair amount of pathology training, and this is also something that's going to be very important as wildlife veterinarians, is taking advantage of the samples that you can collect from dead animals. And we with the mountain gorillas, we maintain a good collection of all the skeletons from these dead gorillas, because you can also learn a lot about the disease history of gorillas from their bones. In rare cases, and we are able to collect some blood samples from the gorillas as well as some of the other animals. And I don't want to go into too much depth of this, but this is part of this sort of bigger picture of epidemiology and trying to put the infectious disease issues together. So for part of my PhD, I looked at a series of different infectious diseases and what those patterns were. Now, both amongst the wild gorillas, we had some captive gorillas, so those that had been, the poachers had usually killed their families and then kept the babies, and they tried to sell the babies, and those were confiscated. Very similar to the problem, I think, with orangutans in this part of Asia, and other animals and primates as well. We had golden monkeys that are the other wild primates that live with the mountain gorillas, some other confiscated monkeys, and then humans that worked with gorillas. So again, I don't want to go into any detail here, but having those blood samples can be very important for trying to tease out some of the patterns of epidemiology and looking at what infections might be shared, what might be more prevalent in humans versus gorillas, what might be more common in gorillas versus humans, and trying to piece together and how those infectious diseases and agents might be circulating between the different groups. Again, this is sort of the same kind of thing, just with parasitology and looking at fecal samples. So yes, it's very nice to have blood samples, but again, those might be pretty rare, and sometimes, in some cases, the same information can be collected from the non-invasive samples. Just also want to point out that I think many of us are used to having to collect samples and do lots of preservation and then bring them to laboratories either here at the university or maybe at the National Vet Lab and places like that. Another part of the work that I did for my PhD was trying to figure out how actually to do more to bring the lab out into the field. And this is something that's the technology is getting much better to be able to start doing more advanced techniques in the field. But for example, even 5 years ago, I was able to use this machine, which is a real-time PCR machine. I think you all know PCR, yes? Okay. So this is a real-time PCR machine that you can hook up to a battery from a car and a computer, and it all fits in a backpack like this, and you can bring it out. You can literally bring it right out into the forest and do advanced, do PCR diagnostics on samples and get results within a few minutes or within an hour out in the field. And I think this kind of technology is going to be getting more and more advanced and smaller, that we'll be able to do these kind of things more and more in the field. And it will greatly increase our knowledge base and the capability that we have of understanding disease patterns in wildlife, because we will no longer be limited by having liquid nitrogen and cold chains and refrigerators and things like that we have to be bringing into remote areas. just again, the point about the employee health programs and working with all of these people, because again, in most cases, these are the people that have the most contact with these wild animals. So, it's very important to think about both the things that they might be getting from gorillas, as well as things that they could possibly be spreading to the gorillas. I don't want to talk too much about this, but again, the last thing that I highlighted was actual clinical work on the gorillas, and for the most part, I think many of you will learn as you start doing more and more wildlife medicine that it becomes more and more limited. Many of us as wildlife veterinarians joke that we used to be very, very good clinicians. Because when you're either in a zoo or an animal hospital, you might be seeing many cases every day, and you're seeing complicated things and kidney disease and heart failure and things that are more and more complicated, and really thinking like a veterinarian. When you're doing wildlife, oftentimes it's much more limited, and you're dealing with wounds, outbreaks of certain infectious diseases, and things that it's almost a bit more like first aid. And I think as both the technology and the interest in the resources get better and better, hopefully that will change a bit. But I think that might be one of the things that you'll all start to experience as wildlife veterinarians. That your clinical skills might start to decline because you're using those skills less and less. So I would encourage you to try to do all that you can, and to make sure that you're going to your continuing education and staying current as a veterinarian, because it's very easy to lose all of those things when you're working with wildlife, because these opportunities can be very rare. Just want to also make an obvious note that this work can be dangerous and very challenging. A lot of the wild animals that we work with are very strong animals. They have very big teeth. They don't like when people come and start shooting dart guns at them. They don't like when members of their family are being handled. They may not even like people being in the forest. So I think you're probably all aware in your wildlife experiences that there are inherent risks in this. Aside from all of the risks that we take every day, but you have to have a lot of respect and be very cautious with whatever animals you're working with, whether it's elephants or gorillas or monkeys that can bite, or even small rodents, because most wild animals are going to protect themselves no matter what they do. So just always make sure that your own safety and the people that you're working with is at the forefront, because accidents happen quite often, and it's always important to take your own safety in mind as well as the safety of the animals that you're working with. And I could tell you a long story about this picture, and maybe when we have some lunch, I'll tell you the rest of the story. So some of the issues that we commonly see with the gorillas are injury types of things. This is a gorilla that appeared to have broken its lower leg, and you can see that her right foot is very, very swollen. What was interesting about this case is that with a gorilla with a broken leg, there's not much you can do. You can't go and do surgery and put a cast on it, because the gorilla has to stay in the wild. So in this case, all we could really do is just monitor the gorilla and go and watch every day and try to see if she was getting better and if she was getting better. And you can see, this is a picture of her walking, and you can see that she's lifting this foot up all the way off the ground. And what was interesting about this case is that usually if any of you have broken a bone, the doctors will put a cast on you, or if you've repaired animals with broken bones, you put a cast on, and usually somewhere 8 to 12 weeks, if everything is good, then that bone will heal and you can take the cast off. And what was interesting in this case is right around about 10 to 12 weeks after this gorilla had broken her leg, she started to put weight on it again. So she basically very naturally kept all of her weight off of it until it healed, and then once it was healed, she started to use it again. And just the point I want to make here is that I think as veterinarians, sometimes we want to jump in and do the things that we're trained to do and use all of our skills. But we should also remember that with wild animals, that they can be very resilient and very strong and very able to deal with a lot of these injury types of things themselves. So sometimes one of the hardest things to do as a wildlife veterinarian is to just sit back and watch and see if everything's going to be okay. This is a similar case. So this is an adult male gorilla after he got in a fight with another gorilla. And again, right after the fight, he was very sick. His wounds were badly infected. He wasn't moving for a few days. He wasn't eating very well. Everybody was afraid that he was going to die. The guys in the national park said, "We want you to do something. You need to treat him. You need to treat him." But our feeling is with these sort of a problem is that this is a natural injury for gorillas when they fight. This is part of their life, and for the most part, we don't want to interfere with the natural cycles and the natural things that are happening in the forest. So this is a case where we just watch things heal, and you can see the notes here. This is 9 days after the original injury. It still has pretty bad open wounds. This is a few days later. Everything is starting to heal pretty well. This is 18 days. You can see he still looks a bit scraggly, but his wounds are mostly healed. And this is 24 days. So this is only 3 weeks after these very, very deep wounds on his back. And you can see that they're all healed. He just has scars left. And again, this is with no treatment. And so this, again, is an example of how sometimes, you have to use your experience and your knowledge that these animals might be able to heal and be okay on their own, to just let them be. And I think most of you probably that have worked in a zoo, you would know that if you had seen those wounds on an animal in the zoo, right away you would have treated them, you would have given them antibiotics, and maybe done some surgery to repair those wounds. But a lot of times with these wild animals, it's more dangerous to do something than it is to sit back and just try to let them heal on their own. We also see some problems with different kinds of hair loss. Sometimes when we do exams on these gorillas, we find that they have parasites. These are a couple of examples of a different sort of a mange mite that some of the gorillas have. Sometimes we never find a reason for it, and we think that it might be hormonal. We're not really sure, but this is another one of these the sort of monitoring and disease issues that we see with the gorillas. These are all cases we did not find any parasites with these. We also have a fair amount of respiratory disease, and we think a lot of these upper respiratory diseases are agents that they get from their contact with people. And most of the time when we see the gorillas that start to get coughing and sneezing and colds, like human colds, we very often will step in to treat them because we think it's something that's not natural and it's been given to them from people. Yeah, so this is just an example where we've gone in to treat. So my time is slowly running out, so I'm going to rush through the end here. The monitoring is an important part of it, and again, we'll talk more about this week, but we set up a system with the gorillas to be able to do regular monitoring and to keep track of different clinical signs as well as which gorillas were getting sick. Those to be able to basically track different issues. So this is, for example, this is in July of one year we saw a number of gorillas getting sick, and we kept track every day of how many were sick, how many were not sick, and I think Dominic will stress this in the next few days, but one of the very important things when you're doing wildlife monitoring is when you're counting both the animals that are sick and the animals that are not sick. Because it's very important to understand those ratios and not just have a count of animals that are sick so that you can determine if things are getting worse. So in this case, we just from monitoring this group and looking at this curve, this is a very important piece of data that years later. So for part of my PhD, I was trying to model the infectious diseases and how things are transmitted in gorillas. And it was nice to be able to have, these are curves that are generated from the generated from the computer. And it was nice to be able to figure out which one of these curves fit best with this black line from a real outbreak. So again, this is the monitoring and things that they both have a use in and of themselves to be able to understand and look at what's happening within a group, but they can also have bigger implications when you're trying to get a bigger picture and do things like model the diseases in the gorillas. I'm going to skip over. I was going to talk a little bit about the modeling that I did, but let me just skip past this. Maybe if there's time, maybe we can talk more about this week. Again, just back to this idea of the emerging infectious diseases, and I think what Dr. Parntuck was saying at the beginning, a lot of what the Respond projects are involved with is trying to look at the issue of the contribution that wildlife make to diseases that can come out and either through domestic animals or spread into people. get into larger populations, and then become global problems. I was going to cover the classic epidemiologic triad, but I think Dominic will do that much better than I will. So that's all I have, and thank you very much for your attention. Should we do questions now or later, or? Okay. So I will, while Dominic gets his presentation loaded, I'm happy to take any questions. Does anybody have any questions? Is everybody still awake? Does everyone need to get up and jump? Nobody? Okay. If you have any, obviously we're here all week, and I think we're going to come back to many of these topics, but feel free to ask me anything anytime this week, and hopefully I can answer. If not, I'll steer you towards Dominic.
มีคำถามไหมคะค่ะก่อนจะไปเบรกนะคะเดี๋ยวถ้าพี่ๆคนไหนว่างหรือว่ามีสำเนาบัตรประชาชนนะคะรบกวนนำสำเนาบัตรประชาชนจำนวน2 แผ่นนะคะไปให้น้องที่อยู่ตรงโต๊ะลงทะเบียนนะคะหรือว่าถ้าไม่มีเนี่ยก็ใช้บัตรประชาชนตัวจริงก็ได้นะคะเดี๋ยวน้องเขาจัดการให้แล้วก็ตอนนี้นะคะมีเวลาเบรกประมาณ10 นาทีนะคะห้องเบรกอยู่ตรงข้ามกับห้องนะคะเดินออกประตูไปจะมีประตูเยื้องๆตรงข้ามตรงนี้เลยนะคะเดี๋ยวกลับมาเจอกันอีก10 นาทีค่ะขอบคุณค่ะ
เดี๋ยวตอนนี้อยู่ไปเรียนแล้วไม่เหรอเรียนโทโอ้เรียนโทเป็นใครอ่ะเรียนที่เชียงใหม่